He saved the Union. He ended slavery. But Abraham Lincoln's story is not just one of glory and triumph. It is a story filled with pain, chronic depression, and choices that left a trail of blood. We know Lincoln as a legend. But who was he? Really? A hero who united a nation? Or an obsessed politician willing to sacrifice liberty for his cause? This is a story about the man, the myth, and the shadows he left behind. Abraham Lincoln wasn't just born into poverty, he was forged by it. His first home was a tiny, single-room log cabin with a dirt floor in the unforgiving backwoods of Kentucky. As the son of a frontiersman, his hands knew the calluses of grueling, back-breaking labor from an early age, clearing land, splitting timber, and wrestling with the constant threat of hunger and disease. It was a life defined by constant movement, as his family endlessly sought a better life on land that was always just out of reach. In this harsh, unforgiving world, there was no time for childhood or formal schooling. Every day was a fight for survival, leaving no room for weakness or indulgence. When he was just 9 years old, life dealt him a blow that would leave a permanent scar. His mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, succumbed to milk sickness, a devastating illness that poisoned entire communities. Abraham and his sister helped to plane the wood for her coffin and carried it themselves to bury her beneath a tree on a nearby knoll. For a boy, this was not just a loss. It was a brutal, intimate encounter with death that would forever cast a shadow of deep, consuming melancholy over his spirit. This tragedy forged in him not only an immense resilience, but also a profound empathy, a sense that life was unfair and often cruel. After the loss of his mother, he found his only true teacher and friend in books. He read anything he could get, his hands on, sometimes walking dozens of miles to borrow a book from a neighbor. Books were his refuge. He would lie on the floor of the cabin for hours, reading by the flickering light of a single candle or the warmth of a fire, his tall, gangly shadow his only company. He memorized passages from the Bible, read Shakespeare, and studied Aesop's fables. He wasn't just acquiring knowledge. He was shaping a keen intellect, honing a powerful command of language, and forging a unique style of thinking that would one day help him write speeches that would change a nation forever. It was his first battle, a battle with ignorance, and one he would win with fierce determination, setting the stage for his improbable, yet deeply challenging, future. If the first part of Lincoln's life was forged in poverty, the second was a true education in the world of ambition. After a childhood spent on the farm, he sought any work that would allow him to rise above his beginnings. He worked as a flatboatman on the Mississippi, and it was there, in the port of New Orleans, that he first witnessed the horrors of slavery firsthand. This brief but searing experience left a deep and lasting impression on him. He became a store clerk, a postmaster, and a surveyor, absorbing every lesson with a relentless thoroughness. All of these jobs, however simple they seemed, were stepping stones toward his true calling, the law, and ultimately, politics. His reputation grew, earning him the nickname Honest Abe, and through his powerful speeches, he became a force in his home state. But if his legal career was a path to renown, his political ambitions became the source of his greatest disappointments. Lincoln lost his first election to the Illinois General Assembly. He then went on to lose 2 bids for the U.S. Senate. Behind these dry facts is a long list of public failures that didn't just test his perseverance, but also took a profound toll on his mental health, feeding the chronic depression that shadowed him. These were not mere losses, but a series of deeply personal blows that we tend to romanticize success. But for Lincoln, each defeat was not an endpoint, but an essential part of the journey. Every lost political battle didn't break him, it tempered him. Each failure made his political instincts sharper, his oratory skills more powerful, and his resolve unshakable. From the outside, it could have seemed that Lincoln was simply obsessed with power. He pursued recognition with an unbelievable tenacity. But, in my opinion, his failures don't just demonstrate resilience. They prove that great ambition can be forged in the fire of bitter experience. His ambition was the engine, and his failures were the fuel. Beneath the towering public figure of Abraham Lincoln was a man who waged a profound inner war. Historians and biographers agree that Lincoln suffered from chronic depression, which in his time was simply called melancholy. These were not mere bouts of sadness, but periods of deep despair that could plunge him into silence and profound withdrawal. In my opinion, it was this very struggle with darkness that allowed him to develop the extraordinary empathy that would become one of his defining characteristics. As a man who knew suffering firsthand, he could relate to the pain of others, both on a national scale and at a deeply personal level, and no less challenging were the struggles in his private life. His marriage to Mary Todd Lincoln was a source of constant conflict and tension. Mary, who was emotionally volatile and prone to outbursts, could not bear his emotional remoteness, while he, consumed by political ambitions and his own inner pain, could not always provide her with the attention she craved. Their marriage was not the idyllic picture often painted, but a turbulent union of two complex and often lonely people bound together by shared tragedy. In addition to this, in the shadows of Lincoln's public life, there were rumors and secrets that history tends to overlook. His melancholy, his unhappy marriage, and even speculation about his sexuality, all were part of the complex tapestry of his personality. These were the shadows that followed him. He was not a flawless hero, but it is precisely these flaws and this struggle that make him not just a legend, but a deeply human figure who was able to understand the pain of a nation because he carried it within his own soul. With the election of Abraham Lincoln as president, the bloodiest chapter in American history began. The Civil War was not just a political conflict, but a living nightmare that pitted brother against brother. Over 4 years, the conflict became the first meat grinder of modern history, claiming the lives of hundreds of thousands. It was a terrifying price that Lincoln accepted as necessary. His resolve to preserve the Union was unshakable, and he was willing to do whatever it took to achieve that goal. In my opinion, it was during this period that his greatest contradiction emerged. As a man who had known pain from his earliest years, he was forced to become an instrument of mass death. His wartime decisions drew fierce criticism, even from his supporters. To suppress dissent in the North and prevent sabotage in the border states, he suspended the writ of habeas corpus, a fundamental civil liberty. This allowed him to imprison thousands without charge or trial. For many, this was an encroachment on freedom, the ultimate act of tyranny. He, more than anyone, understood that he was risking turning liberty into a dictatorship, but in his eyes, it was the only path to saving the nation's future. A lawyer by trade, he was forced to defy the law in order to save the country that was founded on it, setting a dangerous precedent. Every day, he lived with the weight of hundreds of thousands of deaths. The pain of the war seemed to accumulate on his shoulders, deepening his already profound melancholy and changing him physically. In 4 years, he aged decades. The lines on his face deepened, and his eyes grew more weary. This was not just a political fight. It was a personal battle with moral consequences. Lincoln did not wage war with a smile on his face. He waged it with anguish in his heart, and that, in my opinion, makes his choices all the more tragic. He became an instrument of fate, forced to make bloody choices to stitch a nation back together. The Civil War was over. The Union was saved. The nation could finally breathe a sigh of relief. But victory did not bring Lincoln the peace he so desperately sought. His inevitable destiny, it seemed, was already written. The story of Abraham Lincoln did not end in the quiet of an office, but in the most brutal and dramatic way possible on the evening of April 14, 1865, as the entire country celebrated the victory. A single gunshot echoed through Ford's Theater. An actor and fanatical Confederate sympathizer, John Wilkes Booth, shot Lincoln in the back of the head, seeking vengeance for the fall of the Confederacy. Lincoln died the next morning, becoming the first assassinated president in American history. This tragedy was, in my opinion, the last and bloodiest chapter in his story, a final culmination of all the pain and bloodshed he had endured. Lincoln was no longer just a leader. He had become a martyr who paid the ultimate price for his bloody choices. His legacy remains as controversial as ever. He saved the Union, but at what cost? He freed the slaves, but his views on racial equality were complex and ambiguous. Historians still debate whether he was a tyrant who violated constitutional rights for the sake of his goals, or a hero who did what was necessary for the nation's survival. Regardless, his figure remains one of the most significant in American history. In death, he was transformed into a myth, but this legend can never fully hide the man with all his shadows, who was far more complex and human than we may realize. Abraham Lincoln was a liberator, a tyrant, a husband, and a soul forever haunted by despair. His story is an uncomfortable but true account of how a man forged by poverty and grief rose to the highest office to save the nation he loved and ultimately to sacrifice himself. His greatness, in my opinion, lies not in his flawless perfection, but in his profound humanity, in his capacity to fail, to doubt, and to suffer. He was the legend who saved a country, but as we've seen, behind that legend is a figure far more complex and deeply human. And perhaps it is this very contradiction that makes him one of the greatest leaders in history. Because in the end, behind every great myth, there is always a man filled with both light and shadow. Thank you for watching. If you want to continue this journey into the depths of history, please let us know in the comments who we should tell you about in the next video. Goodbye.